My daughter sent me a message. "Mom, take the old photo album and leave the house." I asked her why. She responded, "Before they find it." I didn't understand what she meant, but I did as she said. Later, when I opened the album, I understood the urgency in her voice, and I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The text message arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was sorting through mail at the kitchen table of my farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania. The ancient oak beams above me creaked in the autumn wind, a sound I'd grown comfortable with over 63 years of living. My daughter Tilly's words glowed on the screen like a warning flare. "Mom, grab the old photo album and leave the house." I stared at the message, reading it 3 times. Tilly never texted during work hours. She was a corporate attorney in Philadelphia, always buried in contracts and depositions. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed back. "Why, sweetheart?" The 3 dots appeared immediately, dancing with unusual urgency. Then her response materialized. "Before they find it." My heart began hammering against my ribs in a rhythm I didn't recognize. Before, who found what? I stood from the table, the chair scraping against the worn wooden floor. The farmhouse suddenly felt different, as if the walls themselves were holding secrets I'd been too blind to notice. The old photo album. She could only mean one thing. The burgundy leather album that had belonged to my late husband Richard's mother, Joyce. It had been tucked away in the attic for years, gathering dust among boxes of Christmas decorations and forgotten furniture. I'd only brought it down last month when my son Edward mentioned wanting to digitize family photos for some project his wife Rachel was organizing. That should have been my first warning. I climbed the narrow attic stairs, each step groaning under my weight. Dust motes danced in the thin beam of light from the single window. The album sat exactly where I'd left it, on top of a trunk near the old dress form that still wore Joyce's wedding veil. I grabbed it with both hands, feeling the weight of it. Heavier than memory, heavier than old photographs should be. Tilly's text had said to leave the house. That seemed dramatic, but something in her tone, even through the sterile medium of text, conveyed genuine fear. I hurried back downstairs, tucked the album under my arm, grabbed my purse and car keys, and walked out the front door without looking back. My sedan sat in the gravel driveway, faithful and reliable. I drove without thinking, following the winding country roads until I found myself at Miller's Pond, a quiet spot where Richard and I used to bring the children for picnics. The parking area was empty. I pulled into a space beneath a sprawling willow tree and cut the engine. Silence wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. My hand shook as I opened the album. The first pages showed exactly what I expected. Sepia-toned photographs of Joyce and her husband William on their wedding day in 1948, stiff and formal, in front of a church I recognized as the old Lutheran chapel in town. Young faces full of hope and uncertainty. I turned the pages slowly, watching them age through the decades. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, Joyce holding baby Richard in a hospital room. Then I reached the middle of the album, and everything changed. Between pages 32 and 33, someone had created a false backing. I only noticed it because the album felt thicker than it should, and when I pressed on the burgundy leather, I felt something rigid beneath the photographs. My fingernails found a seam, carefully hidden but now obvious once discovered. I pulled gently. The false backing came away, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside were documents, legal papers, yellowed with age but preserved with obvious care. I lifted them out with trembling fingers and began to read. The first was a property deed, dated 1952, transferring ownership of the farmhouse and surrounding 200 acres from one Martin Blackwood to Joyce Ann Sullivan, her maiden name. The signature at the bottom was witnessed by a notary whose stamp had long since faded to barely visible. My mind raced. Richard had always told me the farmhouse was inherited through his father's family, that it had been in the family for generations. But this deed told a different story. Joyce had owned the land before she married William. The second document made my blood run cold. It was a birth certificate, dated April 15, 1949. The mother's name, Joyce Ann Sullivan. The father's name, Martin Blackwood. The child's name, Richard William Sullivan. Richard William Sullivan. My husband. But the date was wrong. Richard's birthday was October 23, 1950. I'd celebrated it with him for 40 years before he died of a heart attack 3 years ago. The birthday on this hidden certificate was 18 months earlier, which meant either this was a different child, or everything Richard had believed about his own birth was a lie. My phone buzzed. Another text from Tilly. Did you get it? Are you safe? I typed back with shaking fingers. I have it. I'm at Miller's Pond. What is going on? Don't go home yet. Rachel filed a property claim this morning. She's saying Grandma Joyce's will was forged. She's trying to take the farm. The words hit me like a physical blow. Rachel, my daughter-in-law of 5 years, the woman who'd swept into Edward's life with her designer clothes and professional ambition, the woman who'd spent the last year being overly sweet to me, volunteering to help organize Richard's mother's estate papers after Joyce passed away 6 months ago, the woman who had asked specifically about the photo album. She knows about the documents, I typed back. How? I don't know. But Mom, there's more. I found something in the courthouse records. Someone else filed a claim, too. A man named James Blackwood. He says he's Martin Blackwood's grandson and the rightful heir to the property. The phone nearly slipped from my hands. I looked down at the birth certificate again, at Martin Blackwood's name in the father column. If this document was real, if Martin Blackwood was Richard's biological father, then this James Blackwood might actually be Richard's nephew, which would make him family. Family with a legal claim to the land I'd called home for 40 years. My phone rang, making me jump. Edward's name appeared on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Mom, where are you? His voice was tight with an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. Worry? Anger? I'm out. What's wrong? Rachel said you took some documents from the house. Important documents about Grandma's property. She says you're trying to hide assets before the estate settles. Edward, that's not... Why would you take anything without telling us? We're your family. We're supposed to handle this together. The betrayal in his voice cut deeper than any legal document could. Rachel had gotten to him first, had already planted her version of events in his mind. My own son, questioning my integrity. I need you to come home, Mom. We need to talk about this. Rachel's lawyer is going to be here at 4 o'clock, and we need to present a united front. Please. The desperation in that final word told me everything. He wasn't asking me to come home for my benefit. He was asking because Rachel had instructed him to. I'll think about it, I said, and ended the call before he could respond. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the documents. I looked at them again, forcing myself to read more carefully. Beneath the birth certificate was a letter, handwritten on paper so thin it was nearly transparent. The ink had faded to a pale brown, but the words were still legible. My dearest Joyce, I know what we've done is unforgivable in the eyes of many, but I cannot regret the love we shared or the child that love created. When you marry William next month, you will give Richard the stable home and respectable life he deserves. I will honor our agreement and remain silent, but know that I will always be watching over him from a distance. The property is yours absolutely, with no conditions or claims from my family. This is my gift to you and to our son, the only inheritance I can provide without destroying your reputation. Keep these papers safe. If William's family ever questions the ownership, you will need proof. With all my love and eternal regret, Martin. The letter was dated July 1949, 3 months before Joyce married William. I sat in my car, surrounded by the quiet rustle of willow leaves, holding the evidence of a secret that had been buried for more than 70 years. Joyce had loved another man. She'd had his child. Then she'd married someone else, and built a life on carefully constructed lies. And now, 3 generations later, those lies were rising from their grave to destroy everything. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mrs. Sullivan? A man's voice, smooth and professional. My name is James Blackwood. I believe you have some documents that belong to my family. I'd very much like to discuss them with you. Privately. I ended the call without responding and turned off my phone. The shadows were growing longer across the pond. I had maybe 2 hours before Edward expected me home, before Rachel's lawyer arrived with whatever legal trap they'd prepared. 2 hours to figure out how a 63-year-old widow could protect her home from a daughter-in-law who'd been planning this attack for months, and a stranger who claimed blood rights to property I'd believed was mine by marriage and inheritance. I looked down at the photo album, at Joyce's young face smiling up from a wedding photo, hiding secrets that would outlive her by decades. Before they find it, Tilly had warned, but they already knew. They'd known before I did. The question now was what they planned to do with that knowledge, and whether I could stay ahead of them long enough to uncover the rest of Joyce's buried secrets. Because if there was one hidden compartment in this album, there might be others. And if Joyce had been careful enough to preserve these documents, she might have left more clues about the truth. Clues that could either save my home or prove that I'd never had any legal right to it at all. I started the car and pulled out of the parking area, but I didn't drive toward home. Instead, I headed for the old county library, where the archives held records going back to the town's founding in 1823. If Martin Blackwood had owned this property, there would be records of how he acquired it. If Joyce had received it from him, there might be other documents she'd filed. And if Rachel and this James Blackwood thought they could take my home based on 70-year-old secrets, they were about to learn that I hadn't survived 6 decades of life, 40 years of marriage, and 3 years of widowhood by being easily intimidated. The real investigation was just beginning. The county library closed at 7 o'clock on Tuesdays. I had exactly 90 minutes to search records that might take days to properly examine. The building was a converted Victorian mansion, all dark wood and high ceilings, with the musty smell of old paper that I'd always found comforting. Today, it smelled like desperation. Mrs. Carson— No, I caught myself, remembering your instruction. Mrs. Harrison, the head librarian, looked up from her desk with surprise when I hurried through the door. We'd known each other for 20 years since she'd first moved to town. "Carrie Sullivan," she said warmly. "It's been months since I've seen you here." "I need to access the property records archive," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Specifically, anything related to the Blackwood family and land transfers from the 1940s and 50s. Her eyebrows rose slightly, but she was too professional to pry. "Of course. The archives are in the basement. I'll get you set up." She led me down a narrow staircase into a climate-controlled room lined with filing cabinets and boxes of documents. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh white glow. "The property records are organized by decade and then alphabetically by surname," Mrs. Harrison explained, gesturing to a row of cabinets. "The 1940s and 50s are in these 2 sections. Do you need anything else?" "This is perfect. Thank you." She hesitated at the door. "Carrie, is everything all right? You seem upset." "Family matters," I said, which was both true and completely inadequate. "Nothing to worry about." After she left, I pulled open the first drawer and began searching. My fingers moved through folder after folder, each containing deeds, surveys, and transfer documents. Blackwood, Blackwood, Blackwood. The name appeared more often than I expected. Martin Blackwood had been a significant landowner in the county, with properties scattered across 3 townships. I found the folder for my farmhouse address and pulled it out with trembling hands. The earliest document was dated 1921, a deed showing that Martin Blackwood had purchased the property and 200 surrounding acres from the estate of Jonathan Miller for $8,000, a fortune in those days. The next document, dated 1952, showed the transfer to Joyce Ann Sullivan, just as the hidden deed had indicated. But this version was different. This one included a notation at the bottom: "Transfer in settlement of private agreement. No monetary consideration exchanged." A settlement of private agreement. That could mean anything. But combined with Martin's letter, the implication was clear. He'd given Joyce the land as support for their illegitimate child. I photographed every page with my phone, my hands steadier now that I had a task to focus on. Then I returned to the cabinets, searching for anything else related to Martin Blackwood. That's when I found the will. It was filed in 1978, the year Martin died. I scanned through the legal language, looking for mentions of property. Most of his estate had been divided among his 3 legitimate children, including a son named Robert Blackwood, who would be James Blackwood's father if the timeline made sense. But there was a curious clause near the end. Regarding the property located at 1847 Meadowbrook Road, previously transferred to Joyce Ann Sullivan in 1952, I hereby confirm that said transfer was made freely and without coercion, and that neither I nor my heirs retain any claim to said property or its proceeds. I stared at the words, relief flooding through me. Martin himself had confirmed the transfer was legitimate, and that his heirs had no claim. This document, officially filed and witnessed, should be enough to stop James Blackwood's claim in its tracks. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, saw Edward's name, and silenced it. Then I noticed I had 7 missed calls and 12 text messages. I quickly scrolled through them. Edward: Mom, please call me back. Edward: Rachel's lawyer is here. We need those documents. Tilly: Edward called me. He's furious. What's happening? Unknown number. Mrs. Sullivan: This is Attorney Patricia Winters representing Rachel Sullivan in the matter of the Joyce Sullivan estate. We need to schedule a meeting immediately. And then, most recently from Tilly: Mom, I just got served with a subpoena. They're demanding I turn over any communications with you about family property. They know I warned you. My breath caught. They were going after Tilly now, trying to make it look like we were conspiring to hide assets. Rachel wasn't just trying to take the farm. She was building a legal case that painted me as a manipulative, dishonest woman trying to cheat her own family. I took photographs of Martin's will, making sure every word was legible, then carefully returned the folder to its place. As I climbed back up the stairs, my mind was racing through possibilities and problems. The will proved Martin had no regrets about the transfer, but Rachel's claim wasn't about Martin. It was about Joyce's will, about whether Joyce had the legal right to leave the property to Richard, and through him, to me. Mrs. Harrison was helping another patron when I emerged from the basement. I waved goodbye and hurried to my car, checking over my shoulder more than once. The parking lot was nearly empty, just my sedan and 2 other vehicles. The autumn sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and purple that would have been beautiful under other circumstances. I sat in the car and finally called Tilly back. Mom, thank heaven. Are you okay? I'm fine. I found something important. Martin Blackwood's will explicitly states that his heirs have no claim to the property. That should stop James Blackwood's lawsuit. That's great, but Mom, this thing with Rachel is getting worse. Her lawyer sent a letter to my firm. They're threatening to sue me for interfering with estate proceedings. They're saying I had advanced knowledge of disputed assets and failed to disclose it. My stomach dropped. Tilly, I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to get dragged into this. I know, Mom, but listen, there's something else. I did some digging into Rachel's background. Before she married Edward, she worked for a real estate development company called Horizon Properties. They specialize in acquiring rural land for commercial development. You think she married Edward to get access to the farm? I think it's possible. The farm is 200 acres on a main road, 10 miles from the interstate. That's prime commercial property. If she could acquire it through Edward's inheritance, it would be worth millions developed. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Rachel's interest in organizing Joyce's estate, her questions about property deeds and family history, her sudden urgency to settle things after Joyce's death. She'd been planning this for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. We need to prove her intent, I said. If we can show she entered the marriage with fraudulent purposes, that's incredibly hard to prove, Mom. And it doesn't change the property law. If Edward inherited through Richard, and Richard inherited through Joyce, then Edward owns half the farm. As his wife, Rachel has legal standing to make claims about the estate. Unless Joyce's transfer from Martin was invalid somehow, that's what Rachel must be arguing, that Joyce never had clear title to the property in the first place. But you just found Martin's will confirming the transfer. A will filed 26 years after the transfer. A good lawyer could argue it doesn't prove the 1952 transfer was legal at the time it happened. They could claim Joyce forged documents, or that Martin was coerced, or a dozen other things. Tilly was quiet for a moment. Mom, I hate to ask this. But did you ever see any legal paperwork when Richard inherited the farm from his parents? I tried to remember. Richard's father, William, had died in 1995, and Joyce had lived in the farmhouse until her death 6 months ago. When Richard inherited, it had seemed straightforward. He was their only child, and the property passed to him automatically. But had there been a will? Had I seen actual legal documents? I don't remember seeing anything formal, I admitted. Joyce just signed the deed over to Richard one day, said she wanted to simplify things while she was still alive. We had a lawyer file the transfer, but I don't remember him asking for any supporting documents. That could be a problem. If there's no clear paper trail proving Joyce had the legal right to transfer the property to Richard, Rachel's lawyer could argue the whole chain of ownership is questionable. A car pulled into the parking lot, and I instinctively ducked lower in my seat. It wasn't Edward's truck, but paranoia was setting in. How had my life transformed in a single day from peaceful widowhood to this nightmare of legal threats and family betrayal? Tilly, I need to find out more about Joyce's relationship with Martin Blackwood. There has to be someone who remembers them, someone who knew the truth. Mom, everyone from that generation is dead or in their 90s. Not everyone. Joyce's younger sister, Judith, is still alive. She's in a nursing home in Harrisburg, but she was always sharp as a tack. She might remember something. That's 3 hours away. Then I'd better get driving. Mom, wait. Edward is going to report you to the police if you don't come home tonight. Rachel's lawyer is pushing him to file a complaint about stolen documents. The words hit like ice water. My own son, threatening to have me arrested. The documents aren't stolen. They were hidden in property that belonged to my husband. That's not how Rachel's framing it. She's saying the photo album was part of Joyce's estate and should have been inventoried with her other possessions. By taking it without permission, you're removing assets from the estate. That's absurd. It's also legally arguable. Mom, please, just come home. Bring the documents. Let's handle this the right way with proper legal channels. I looked down at the photo album on my passenger seat, at the hidden compartment with its precious damning papers. If I went home now, Rachel's lawyer would seize them. They would disappear into discovery motions and legal proceedings. I would lose control of the only evidence that might save my home. I can't do that, sweetheart. Not yet. Tell Edward I'm safe. Tell him I'll be in touch soon. But I need to find Judith first. I need to hear the truth from someone who lived through it. Mom, I love you, Tilly. Thank you for believing in me. I'll call you tomorrow. I ended the call before she could protest further and turned off my phone completely. Then I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, heading east toward Harrisburg. The dashboard clock read 6:47 p.m. The nursing home would have visiting hours until 8 o'clock. If I drove fast and traffic cooperated, I could make it. Behind me, I didn't notice the dark sedan that pulled out of a side street and began following at a careful distance, its driver making a phone call as he maintained visual contact with my taillights. The trap was closing around me, but I was driving straight into the one place that might hold the final pieces of Joyce's puzzle. Assuming Judith's memory was as good as I hoped, and assuming I could reach her before Rachel's people figured out where I was going. The highway stretched ahead, dark and uncertain, and I pressed harder on the accelerator. Harrisburg emerged from the darkness like a constellation of orange streetlights. The nursing home, Riverside Manor, sat on the outskirts of the city, a modern 3-story building that tried too hard to look cheerful with its bright blue trim and flower boxes. I pulled into the visitor parking lot at 8:23 p.m., 11 minutes past visiting hours. The receptionist, a tired-looking woman in her 40s, barely glanced up from her computer. Visiting hours ended at 8. I know, and I'm so sorry. I'm here to see Judith Brennan. I'm her niece, and it's an emergency. Family emergency. That got her attention. She studied my face, probably trying to determine if I was lying. Room 217, second floor. But you've got 15 minutes max before night shift does their rounds. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my knees protesting the exertion. The second-floor hallway smelled of disinfectant and boiled vegetables. Most of the doors were closed, television light flickering beneath them. Room 217 was at the end of the corridor. I knocked softly and pushed the door open. Aunt Judith sat in a wheelchair by the window, illuminated by a reading lamp. At 91, she was a fragile collection of bones and papery skin, but her eyes, those sharp gray eyes, fixed on me with complete clarity. "Carrie Sullivan," she said, her voice stronger than her body suggested. "I wondered when you'd come." The word stopped me in my tracks. "You knew I'd come?" "I knew someone would, eventually. Joyce's secrets never stayed buried for long." She gestured to a chair beside her. "Sit. You look like you've been running." I sat, suddenly aware of how exhausted I was. "Aunt Judith, I need to know about Joyce and Martin Blackwood. I found documents hidden in a photo album. A birth certificate that says Martin was Richard's father." Judith's face didn't change. She simply nodded, as if I'd confirmed something she'd known for 7 decades. Martin Blackwood was the love of Joyce's life. She never loved William. Not really. He was safety and respectability. Martin was passion and impossibility. Why impossible? Because Martin was married when they met. His wife was an invalid, bedridden after a car accident. She lived another 30 years in that condition, and Martin was too honorable to divorce her. But he wasn't honorable enough to stay away from Joyce. The pieces were assembling into a picture I didn't want to see. So Joyce got pregnant. She was 22 years old and terrified. This was 1948 Carrie. Unwed mothers were social pariahs. Martin wanted to claim the child, but that would have destroyed both their lives. So they made an arrangement. Joyce would marry William, a decent man who worked at the grain mill, who'd been courting her for months. William believed Richard was born premature, 2 months after the wedding. And the property transfer? The farmhouse and land? Martin's way of taking care of his son. He couldn't give Richard his name, but he could give him a legacy. The land was worth a fortune even then. He transferred it to Joyce with the understanding that it would eventually pass to Richard. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photograph of Martin's letter. She read it slowly, tears forming in the corners of her eyes. "I helped her hide those documents," Judith whispered. "The night before her wedding to William, she came to me in a panic, said she needed to keep proof of the agreement in case Martin's legitimate children ever tried to claim the property. We created that false compartment in the photo album together. Did William ever find out? No. And Joyce lived with that guilt every day of her marriage. She was a good wife to William, but she never stopped loving Martin. When Martin died in 1978, she didn't go to the funeral. Couldn't. But I found her in the attic that night, holding Richard's baby clothes and weeping. The tragedy of it settled over me like a shroud. Joyce had spent 50 years maintaining a lie, protecting a secret that had shaped 3 generations, and now that secret was being weaponized by people who had no right to it. Aunt Judith, did Richard know? Did he ever suspect that William wasn't his biological father? No. Joyce made me swear never to tell him. She said it would destroy him, learning that his entire identity was built on a lie. And what good would it have done? William raised him, loved him. That made him Richard's real father, regardless of biology. I thought about my husband, about the man I'd loved for 40 years. He'd died believing he was William's son, believing his life was exactly what it appeared to be. Part of me was grateful he'd never learned the truth. "There's a man named James Blackwood," I said. "He's claiming he's Martin's grandson, and that he has a right to the property." Judith's expression hardened. "Robert's son? I heard he'd turned out badly. Got into real estate speculation, shady dealings. Martin would have been ashamed. He's filed a legal claim. And my daughter-in-law Rachel is supporting it somehow. She's trying to have Joyce's will declared invalid." "Rachel?" Judith practically spat the name. "That woman came to visit me 2 months ago. Said she was researching family history for a project. Asked me all sorts of questions about Joyce and the farm, about how the property passed through the family. I thought she was just curious. Now I understand she was gathering ammunition." The betrayal cut deeper, knowing Rachel had even manipulated an elderly woman to get information. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing important. I didn't trust her." There was something calculating in her eyes. Judith reached out and gripped my hand with surprising strength. "But Carrie, there's something else. Something I need to tell you before you go any further." The air in the room seemed to thicken. "What is it?" Joyce wasn't the only one with secrets. When William died in 1995, I helped Joyce go through his papers. We found a lockbox in his workshop. Inside were letters, Dozens of them, written over 30 years. Letters from whom? From Martin to William. My mind went blank. I don't understand. William knew Carrie. He'd known from the beginning. Martin came to him before the wedding and told him everything. Asked William if he'd be willing to marry Joyce and raise another man's child as his own. And William agreed. The room tilted. Why would he do that? Because William loved Joyce desperately. She didn't love him back, not then. But he hoped she'd grow to love him over time. And he wanted children. The doctors had told him he was likely sterile from a childhood illness. Martin's offer gave him both, a wife and a son. It was a bargain made by 3 people who all wanted something they couldn't have any other way. And the letters? Martin wrote to William regularly, always to his work address where Joyce wouldn't see them. He'd ask about Richard's progress in school, whether he was healthy, what his interests were. William would write back with updates. They maintained a secret correspondence until Martin died. I stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Below, the parking lot was nearly empty. My car sat alone under a streetlight. Where are these letters now? That's the problem, dear. They're gone. When Rachel visited me, I mentioned them, stupidly, I realize now. I told her they proved the arrangement between Martin and William was consensual and documented. I thought it might help protect the property claim, but I didn't tell her where they were. Where are they, Aunt Judith? Buried in the old family cemetery behind the Lutheran church. Joyce was terrified someone would find them after she died, so we put them in a metal box and buried it next to her parents' graves. We marked the spot with a small stone angel that looks like a decoration. It's been there for 30 years. My heart was pounding. Rachel doesn't know the exact location? Not from me. But if she's as smart as I think she is, she'll figure it out. There are only so many places to hide something in a small-town cemetery. I checked my phone. Still off. They could be tracking me somehow, though. Rachel had resources I couldn't match. I need to get those letters before she does. Carrie, wait. Judith's voice stopped me at the door. There's one more thing in that box. A document that Martin and William both signed, witnessed by a notary. It's a formal agreement stating that William accepted Richard as his legal son with full knowledge of the biological circumstances, and that Martin relinquished all parental rights. If you can find that document, it proves the entire arrangement was legal and consensual. It would destroy both Rachel's claim and James Blackwood's claim in one stroke. Why didn't Joyce ever file this with the county records? Because filing it would have made Richard's illegitimacy a matter of public record. She was protecting his reputation, even at the cost of clear legal title. She believed the property deed and Martin's will would be enough. But they're not enough. Not against lawyers who know how to create doubt. No, they're not. You need that agreement, Carrie. And you need it before Rachel gets to it. I moved toward the door, then turned back. Aunt Judith, why are you telling me all this now? You kept Joyce's secrets for 70 years. The old woman's face softened. Because Joyce asked me to. On her deathbed. She knew this day might come. Knew that someday someone would try to take what she'd built. She made me promise that if it happened, I'd tell the truth to whoever deserved the property. And you deserve it, Carrie. You loved Richard. You cared for Joyce in her final years. And you've made that farm a home. Rachel just wants to sell it for profit. Joyce would have hated that. I crossed back to her wheelchair and kissed her forehead. Thank you. Be careful, dear. People do terrible things when property and money are involved. And Carrie? Don't trust anyone in your family right now. Not even Edward. I know. I left the room and hurried down the hallway, taking the stairs at a dangerous pace. The receptionist was on the phone and barely noticed me leave. I burst through the front doors into the cool night air and stopped. Edward's truck was parked next to my car. He leaned against the driver's side door, arms crossed, his face a mixture of anger and something that looked like pain. "Hello, Mom?" he said quietly. "Rachel thought you might come here. She tracked your license plate on the highway cameras." My blood turned to ice. "Edward, I can explain. You need to come home. Now. Rachel's lawyer has gotten a judge to issue a restraining order. You're not allowed to remove any more documents or items from the estate. If you don't comply, she'll have you arrested for contempt. This is insane. The estate isn't even in probate yet. She filed emergency papers arguing that you're deliberately hiding assets. The judge agreed there was enough evidence to warrant protective action. He pushed off from my car and walked toward me. Mom, why are you doing this? Why are you making this so hard? Because Rachel is trying to steal my home, Edward. Your home. The place where you grew up. She's trying to make sure everything is handled fairly. You're the one acting suspicious, running around hiding documents, refusing to cooperate. Is that what she told you? His jaw tightened. I know what I see. You took that album without telling anyone. You've been dodging my calls. You drove 3 hours to visit a 91-year-old woman in the middle of the night. That's not normal behavior, Mom. I looked at my son, at the man I'd raised and nurtured and loved, and saw only Rachel's words coming from his mouth. She'd gotten to him completely, had rewritten the narrative so thoroughly that he couldn't see the truth anymore. Did she tell you about Horizon Properties? I asked. Did she tell you that she used to work for a real estate development company that specializes in rural land acquisition? She consulted for them briefly years ago. That's not relevant. It's completely relevant. She married you to get access to the farm, Edward. She's been planning this since before Joyce died. That's a horrible thing to say about my wife. It's the truth. And somewhere inside, you know it. You know she's not who she pretends to be. For just a moment, I saw doubt flicker across his face. Then it hardened again. Give me your car keys, Mom. What? Your keys. Rachel's lawyer says if you won't come voluntarily, I'm authorized to prevent you from leaving until the police arrive. She's already called them. They'll be here in 10 minutes. The betrayal was complete. My own son, threatening to have me arrested. Edward, please, listen to me. There are documents buried in the old cemetery that prove Joyce and Richard had legal right to the property. Documents that will stop Rachel's lawsuit. I need to get them before she does. The cemetery? Mom, do you hear yourself? You sound paranoid. I'm not paranoid. I'm fighting for what's mine. What's ours? Then fight for it the legal way. With lawyers and courts, not by digging up graves in the middle of the night. He was right that it sounded crazy. But I was running out of time and options. I'm sorry, Edward. I truly am. I pulled my keys from my pocket and threw them as hard as I could into the bushes at the edge of the parking lot. Then I ran. I heard Edward shout behind me, heard his footsteps on the pavement. But I had a head start, and I knew he wouldn't actually tackle his 63-year-old mother. I ran past the main building, around the corner, toward the employee parking area I'd noticed when I arrived. Behind the dumpsters, I stopped to catch my breath. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was madness. I was a grandmother running from my own son like a criminal. But I wasn't the criminal. Rachel was. And somehow I had to prove it before she destroyed everything. I heard voices in the distance, Edward calling for me, and now other voices too. Security, probably. I looked around desperately for an escape route. A car approached slowly, headlights off. It pulled up beside me, and the passenger window rolled down. Tilly sat in the driver's seat. Get in, Mom, she said. Quickly. I didn't hesitate. I jumped into the passenger seat, and Tilly accelerated smoothly out of the parking lot, taking a back exit that led away from the main entrance. How did you? I've been tracking your phone's last known location, Tilly said. Before you turned it off, it pinged near here. I figured you were visiting Aunt Judith. I got here 20 minutes ago and saw Edward's truck. I've been waiting. Relief flooded through me. Tilly, you could get in so much trouble for this. I'm already in trouble. Might as well make it count. She glanced at me. Did Aunt Judith tell you anything useful? Everything useful. And terrifying. I filled her in quickly as we drove. The letters, the agreement, the cemetery, Rachel's visit to Judith. When I finished, Tilly was quiet for a long moment. So we need to dig up a box from a cemetery. Yes. Tonight. Before Rachel figures out where it is. If she hasn't already. Tilly turned onto the highway, heading west. The old Lutheran cemetery. I know where it is. I used to play there as a kid during church picnics. I know it's asking too much. Mom, stop. We're in this together now. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Besides, I've always wanted to be part of a thriller plot. This is like something from a movie. Despite everything, I laughed. A very stressful movie. The best kind. Her smile faded. But Mom, after we get these letters, we need a real plan. Rachel has lawyers and money and apparently Edward completely under her control. We can't just keep running. I know. But first we need that evidence. Then we fight back properly. The highway stretched ahead, taking us back toward home, toward a cemetery where 70-year-old secrets lay buried beneath stone angels. Behind us, I imagined Edward on the phone with Rachel, telling her I'd escaped, telling her I was heading for the letters. The race was on. And I had maybe 3 hours to find what Joyce had hidden before Rachel's people got there first, assuming they weren't already digging. The old Lutheran church stood on a hill overlooking the valley, its white steeple ghostly in the moonlight. The cemetery stretched behind it, a maze of weathered headstones and monuments dating back to the 1800s. Tilly killed the headlights as we approached, parking on a side road a quarter-mile away. "We walk from here," she whispered, though there was no one around to hear us. The whole situation had turned us into conspirators, sneaking around in the dark like thieves. We grabbed the flashlights Tilly had brought and started up the hill. The autumn grass was wet with dew, soaking through my shoes. Every sound seemed amplified. The rustle of leaves, an owl calling in the distance, my own ragged breathing. "The Brennan family plot is in the northeast corner," I said, remembering Joyce's parents' graves from various memorial services over the years. "Near the old oak tree." We picked our way between headstones, reading names by flashlight. Henderson, Morrison, Wells. The cemetery seemed endless in the darkness, each shadow potentially hiding someone watching us. My nerves were stretched to breaking. Then Tilly grabbed my arm. "Mom, look." She pointed toward the Brennan family plot. A fresh hole gaped in the earth next to a small stone angel. Dirt was piled beside it, and a shovel lay abandoned on the ground. We were too late. I ran forward, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly. The hole was about 2 feet deep, clearly dug within the last few hours. I dropped to my knees and felt around in the dirt, desperate, but found nothing. The metal box was gone. "No, no, no." The words came out as a moan. "She got here first." "Maybe it was James Blackwood's people," Tilly said, but she didn't sound convinced. I sat back on my heels, feeling defeat settle over me like a physical weight. Without those letters, without the agreement between Martin and William, I had no way to prove the property transfer was legitimate. Rachel had won. Then I noticed something. The dirt pile was still loose, still fresh. Whoever dug this hadn't filled it back in, hadn't even tried to hide what they'd done. That suggested either incredible arrogance or, "They were interrupted," I said, standing up. "Or, they're still here." Tilly swept her flashlight across the cemetery. The beam caught something moving between the headstones, maybe 50 yards away. A figure ducked behind a tall monument. "There." Tilly's voice was tense. We weren't alone in the cemetery. My first instinct was to run, but something made me hesitate. If someone was still here watching us, maybe they hadn't found what they were looking for. Maybe the box wasn't in the hole because it had never been buried exactly where Judith remembered. Aunt Judith said next to her parents' graves. I whispered, "But this angel statue? Is it actually a grave marker or just decoration?" Tilly knelt and examined the base of the stone angel. "It's not a marker. Look, no name, no dates. It's just ornamental." So maybe Joyce didn't mean next to the graves in a literal sense. Maybe she meant near them, in the general area. We started searching around the Brennan plot, looking for any sign of disturbed earth or hidden markers. The other figure in the cemetery had disappeared, but I could feel eyes watching us. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. "Here," Tilly said suddenly. "Mom, come here." She was crouched beside a small flat stone that I'd assumed was a footstone for one of the graves, but when we cleared away the grass and leaves, I saw it had an inscription. MS. For the truth to rest in peace until needed. MS. Joyce Sullivan. I dropped to my knees and started digging with my hands. Tilly found a fallen branch and used it to pry at the edges of the stone. The earth beneath was looser than it should be, and after 5 minutes of frantic work, my fingers hit something metal. The box was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 8 inches square, made of tin with a tight-fitting lid. I pulled it from the ground with shaking hands. "Open it," Tilly urged. I pried the lid off. Inside, wrapped in waterproof plastic, were bundles of letters tied with string. Beneath them, a single sheet of heavy paper, folded and sealed with wax that had long since dried and cracked. I carefully unfolded the document. Even by flashlight, the words were clear. Agreement of paternity and custody. This document, executed on May 15, 1949, establishes the following. Martin James Blackwood acknowledges himself as the biological father of the child Richard William Sullivan, born April 15, 1949. William Robert Sullivan agrees to accept said child as his legal son, with full knowledge of the biological circumstances, and to raise him as his own. Joyce Ann Sullivan agrees to wed William Robert Sullivan and maintain this arrangement in confidence. Martin James Blackwood hereby relinquishes all parental rights and agrees never to publicly claim paternity. William Robert Sullivan accepts full legal responsibility for the child's upbringing. In exchange for this arrangement, Martin James Blackwood transfers title to the property located at 1847 Meadowbrook Road to Joyce Ann Sullivan, said transfer to be recorded separately and to remain independent of this agreement. All parties acknowledge this arrangement is made freely and without coercion. 3 signatures followed: Martin's, William's, and Joyce's. Beneath them, a notary's seal dated May 15, 1949. "This is it," I breathed. "This proves everything." "Photograph it," Tilly said urgently. "Multiple copies, cloud backup, everything." I pulled out my phone and had just turned it on when Tilly grabbed my wrist. "Wait, if you turn that on, they can track—" Too late. The phone powered up, and immediately notification sounds began chiming. 17 missed calls, 23 text messages, and 1 email from an address I didn't recognize with the subject line, "Last warning." Tilly snatched the phone from me and opened the email. "Mrs. Sullivan, this is James Blackwood. You have something that belongs to my family. I'm prepared to offer you a settlement, $100,000 cash for any documents related to Martin Blackwood's estate. This offer expires at midnight tonight. After that, I will be forced to take more aggressive legal action. I'm in the cemetery right now, and I know you're here too. Let's talk face to face." My blood ran cold. "He's here. James Blackwood is here right now. Then we need to leave, now." We started back toward the car, moving as quickly as we dared between the headstones. I clutched the metal box against my chest. Behind us, I heard footsteps crunching on gravel. "Mrs. Sullivan, please wait." A man's voice, cultured and calm. "I don't mean you any harm. I just want to talk." We didn't stop. Tilly grabbed my hand and pulled me faster, our flashlights bobbing wildly. The cemetery gate was ahead, maybe 100 yards. Then a car's headlights flared to life, blocking our path. A black SUV sat across the cemetery entrance, engine running. A woman stepped out of the driver's side. Rachel. "Hello, Carrie," she said, her voice carrying across the cemetery. "I should have known you'd be clever enough to find the real hiding spot. That's one thing I underestimated about you." We stopped, trapped between Rachel ahead and James Blackwood behind. Tilly's hand tightened on mine. "You've been planning this for years," I said, loud enough for my voice to carry. "You married my son just to get access to the property." Rachel laughed, the sound bitter and cold. "You make it sound so calculated." I did love Edward in the beginning, but love doesn't pay the bills, Carrie. And when I realized what that farm was really worth, when I started researching the title and found all the irregularities in Joyce's ownership, I saw an opportunity. "So you contacted James Blackwood?" Actually, he contacted me. He'd been researching his grandfather's estate and discovered the property transfer to Joyce. He thought there might be grounds to challenge it. When he learned I'd married into the family, he proposed a partnership. We split any proceeds from the sale, 50-50. James Blackwood emerged from between the headstones, a tall man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit that seemed absurd in a cemetery at midnight. "Mrs. Sullivan, this doesn't have to be unpleasant. That document you're holding could be interpreted in multiple ways. Martin relinquished parental rights? Yes. But did that give William legal ownership of the property? The transfer was made to Joyce, not to William and Joyce jointly. When Joyce died, did Richard have clear right to inherit? These are questions that could tie up the estate in court for years. Or, Rachel added, walking closer, you could accept that this is over. Sell the farm, take your portion of the proceeds, and move somewhere smaller, somewhere you can actually manage at your age. You're 63 years old, Carrie. How much longer can you really maintain 200 acres by yourself? The condescension in her voice ignited something in me. I've managed perfectly well for 3 years since Richard died. Have you? Rachel's smile was sharp. Edward tells me you forgot to pay the property taxes last quarter. That you let the insurance lapse for a month before he caught it. That you can barely keep up with basic maintenance. You're failing, Carrie, and you're too proud to admit it. Each word was designed to cut, to make me doubt myself. And the terrible thing was, some of it was true. There had been moments of forgetfulness, bills that slipped through the cracks, repairs I'd put off because they seemed overwhelming. Those were minor oversights, Tilly said, her voice strong. My mother is completely competent. Are you sure about that? James Blackwood pulled out his phone. Because I have a recording here from Edward Sullivan stating that he's concerned about his mother's mental state, that she's been behaving erratically, that he fears she may not be capable of managing her own affairs. He pressed play. Edward's voice emerged from the speaker, tired and worried. I don't know what's gotten into her. She's not thinking clearly. She took documents without permission, she's avoiding family, she's making wild accusations about Rachel. I'm starting to think we need to consider whether she's still competent to handle the estate. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. My own son, recorded without his knowledge probably, but still, those were his words, his doubts about my mental capacity. That recording was taken out of context, Tilly said, but her voice wavered. Was it? Rachel moved closer, her expression almost sympathetic. Carrie, everyone can see you're struggling. You're exhausted, you're confused, you're so desperate to hold on to the past that you can't see reality. If this goes to court, we'll present evidence of diminished capacity. We'll have you declared incompetent. Is that really what you want? To have your own children testify that you're not mentally fit? The trap was complete. They'd engineered everything perfectly. The property claim, the legal maneuvering, Edward's doubts about my competence. Even if I had the document proving the transfer was legitimate, they'd found a new angle of attack. Not the property rights, but my mental fitness to contest the claims. You're despicable, I said quietly. I'm practical, Rachel corrected. And right now, I'm offering you one last chance. Give me that box. Accept a settlement of $200,000. Walk away with your dignity intact. Otherwise, this gets ugly. Court battles, competency hearings, your entire life exposed to scrutiny. Can you really handle that? I looked down at the metal box in my hands, at Joyce's carefully preserved secrets. She'd lived with these lies for 70 years, had carried the weight of them until her death. She'd done it to protect Richard, to give him a legitimate life and a secure future. Now her secrets were weapons being used against me. I need to think, I said. You have until midnight, James Blackwood said, checking his watch. 23 minutes. My lawyer files the competency petition first thing tomorrow morning unless we have a settlement. He walked back toward his car, a dark sedan parked beyond Rachel's SUV. Rachel lingered for a moment, her expression unreadable in the moonlight. For what it's worth, Carrie, I did try to like you. But you're so stubborn, so determined to cling to things that should have been sold off years ago. That farm should be a shopping center or a corporate park, something that benefits the community and generates tax revenue. Instead, it's just empty fields and an old woman who can't even keep up with the property taxes. She turned and walked back to her SUV, leaving Tilly and me alone in the cemetery with Joyce's secrets and 23 minutes to make a decision that would determine the rest of my life. Mom, Tilly said urgently, we can fight this. We have the agreement. We have proof. They'll tie it up in court for years, and they'll use my age against me, my supposed incompetence. Edward will testify against me, probably without even realizing he's been manipulated into it. So what do we do? I looked around the cemetery, at the generations of families buried here. Joyce and William rested under a shared headstone 50 feet away. Martin was buried in a different cemetery across town, separated from the woman he loved even in death. They'd all made compromises, had all sacrificed something essential for the sake of respectability and social acceptance. Joyce had given up her true love. William had accepted another man's child. Martin had watched his son grow up from a distance. And what had it bought them? 70 years of lies that were now being used to destroy the very legacy they'd tried to protect. "We don't give them what they want," I said, my voice steady now. "We fight, but not their way. Not in courts with lawyers and competency hearings. We fight smart." "How?" I pulled out my phone and started taking photographs of the agreement, the letters, everything in the box. "We create copies, multiple copies. We send them to trusted people. Your colleagues, a few of my friends from church, the County Historical Society. We make this information impossible to suppress or seize. Then we go public." "Public?" "We tell Joyce's story. All of it. The affair, the illegitimate child, the arrangement between 3 people who loved each other in complicated ways. We turn it from a shameful secret into a human story about people doing their best in difficult circumstances." Tilly's eyes widened. "You want to tell the whole town?" "I want to make it so Rachel and James can't use the secrets as leverage anymore. If everyone knows the truth, if it's out in the open, then what power do they have? The agreement is legally valid. Joyce had clear title to the property. She had the right to leave it to Richard, and Richard had the right to leave it to me. The only reason they've been able to threaten us is because they controlled the narrative." I finished photographing the documents and handed the phone to Tilly. "Upload these to your cloud storage. Send copies to yourself at 3 different email addresses. Make it impossible for them to make this evidence disappear." While Tilly worked on her phone, I carefully returned the documents to the metal box and sealed it. Then I walked toward Rachel's SUV, my stride purposeful. Rachel saw me coming and smiled, thinking she'd won. James Blackwood stood beside his car, looking smug. "Have you made your decision?" Rachel asked. "I have. The answer is no. I'm not selling, I'm not settling, and I'm not being intimidated." Her smile faded. "Then you'll regret this." "Maybe. But at least I'll regret it in my own home, on my own terms." I turned to James Blackwood. "Your grandfather made a choice 70 years ago. He gave up his claim to that property because he loved his son and wanted to provide for him. That was an honorable decision. What you're doing now dishonors his memory. My grandfather was manipulated by a woman who got pregnant to trap him," James said coldly. "Your grandfather was a man who made his own choices, and he documented those choices clearly. I have his agreement with William, signed and notarized. If you want to fight me in court, bring it on. But you should know that I'm making his story public. Tomorrow morning, I'm contacting the local paper. By tomorrow night, everyone in this county will know what really happened." "You wouldn't dare," Rachel said. "You'd expose Richard's illegitimacy. Richard is dead. He's beyond being hurt by gossip. But you're not, Rachel. How do you think Edward will react when he learns you've been conspiring with a stranger to steal his inheritance? When he realizes you married him as part of a real estate scheme?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Rachel's face. "Edward will understand I was protecting our financial interests." "Will he? Because the Edward I raised, the Edward who still exists underneath your manipulation, values family and loyalty above money. When he sees the full picture, when he understands what you've done, he'll leave you. And you'll get nothing. Not the farm, not the money, and not my son." I turned and walked away, Tilly falling into step beside me. Behind us, I heard Rachel and James arguing in low, angry voices. We made it back to Tilly's car. As we drove away, I looked back at the cemetery, at the hill where generations of my family, biological and chosen, rested. The war wasn't over. Tomorrow would bring new battles, but tonight, I'd taken back control of the narrative. Tonight, I'd stopped being a victim and become a fighter. And tomorrow, everyone would learn that Carrie Sullivan was not some confused old woman to be pushed aside. I was a survivor. And I was ready to burn down every secret and lie if that's what it took to protect my home. The lawyer's conference room felt like a courtroom, all dark wood and leather chairs designed to intimidate. Rachel had insisted on neutral ground for what she called a family meeting to resolve the estate issues. Her attorney, Patricia Winters, sat at the head of the table like a judge, her expression professionally neutral. James Blackwood occupied the chair to her right, perfectly groomed and radiating confidence. Edward sat across from me, refusing to meet my eyes. That hurt more than anything Rachel had done. It was 10 o'clock Wednesday morning, less than 12 hours after the cemetery confrontation. I'd spent the night at Tilly's apartment, uploading documents, making copies, preparing. Tilly sat beside me now, her laptop open, ready. "Thank you all for coming," Patricia Winters began. "We're here to discuss a reasonable resolution to the competing claims on the property at 1847 Meadowbrook Road. Mrs. Sullivan, I understand you've refused our settlement offer." "I have." "Then let's lay out the situation clearly. My client, Mrs. Rachel Sullivan, has evidence that suggests irregularities in the chain of title going back to 1952. Mr. James Blackwood has documentation showing his grandfather, Martin Blackwood, was the original owner of the property. There are questions about whether the transfer to Joyce Sullivan was legally valid, and whether subsequent transfers to Richard Sullivan and then to you were properly executed. Those questions have answers," I said calmly. "Perhaps, but resolving them will require expensive litigation that could take years. In the meantime, the property taxes remain unpaid." "They were paid yesterday," Tilly interrupted, sliding a receipt across the table. "In full, with all penalties. I handled it personally." Patricia's expression flickered with annoyance. "That still doesn't address the fundamental ownership issues. Mrs. Sullivan, let me be direct. You're 63 years old, living alone on a property you can barely maintain. You've shown signs of confusion and erratic behavior. Documented where?" I asked. "Your son has expressed concerns about your mental state." "He expressed concerns because he was manipulated into doing so." I turned to Edward. "Son, do you remember when Rachel first started asking questions about the farm? About Grandma Joyce's papers?" Edward shifted uncomfortably. "She was just trying to help organize things." "Was she? Or was she searching for vulnerabilities in the title? For ammunition she could use to contest ownership?" "That's not—" Edward started, but I held up my hand. "Let me finish. Rachel came to you with concerns about my competence. She probably started small, mentioning that I'd forgotten something minor, suggesting that managing the farm was too much for me alone. She planted seeds of doubt, didn't she? Made you start questioning whether I was capable of making my own decisions. Mom, you did forget the property taxes. Once, in 3 years. That's called being human, not being incompetent. But Rachel took that one mistake and built a case around it. Didn't she? She convinced you that your mother, who raised you, who managed that farm with your father for 40 years, suddenly couldn't handle her own affairs." Rachel leaned forward. "Carrie, this isn't about manipulation. It's about realistic assessment of your capabilities. You're not getting any younger, and you want me to believe I'm too old and confused to fight back." I opened the folder I'd brought and pulled out the first document. "This is Martin Blackwood's will, filed in 1978. In it, he explicitly confirms that the property transfer to Joyce was legitimate and that his heirs have no claim. Mr. Blackwood, your father Robert is listed here as a beneficiary of other assets. He never contested this will. Why are you doing so now?" James Blackwood's jaw tightened. "My father didn't know the full circumstances of the transfer. Didn't he? Or did he know but respect his father's wishes?" I pulled out the second document. "This is the agreement between Martin Blackwood, William Sullivan, and Joyce Sullivan, dated May 15th, 1949. It explicitly states that Martin transferred the property to Joyce as part of an arrangement regarding their son Richard. William Sullivan agreed to raise Richard as his own, with full knowledge that Martin was the biological father." The room went silent. Edward stared at the document, his face pale. "What? Your father wasn't William's biological son," I said gently. "He was Martin Blackwood's son, but William loved him and raised him as his own. This agreement proves all three parties consented to the arrangement and that the property transfer was part of that legally binding agreement. This is absurd, Rachel said, but her voice lacked conviction. You expect us to believe this 75-year-old document is authentic? Tilly opened her laptop and turned it toward Patricia Winters. I've already had it authenticated by a documents expert. The paper, ink, and notary seal all date to 1949. The notary's records confirm she witnessed a private agreement between these three parties on this date. It's legitimate. Even if it's real, Patricia said, recovering her composure, it doesn't necessarily. It proves Martin Blackwood deliberately and legally transferred the property to Joyce Sullivan, Tilly continued. It proves William Sullivan accepted Richard as his legal son with full knowledge of the circumstances. And it proves that any claims Mr. Blackwood is making are baseless, because his grandfather explicitly relinquished all rights. James stood abruptly. This is a waste of time. Patricia, I'm not paying you to lose arguments. Either find a way to break this agreement or I'm finding new representation. Mr. Blackwood, please sit down. We need to— No, I've heard enough. He pointed at me. You think you're clever, old woman? You think one document changes anything? I'll drag this through every court in Pennsylvania. I'll make your life such a nightmare that you'll beg to settle. Is that a threat, Mr. Blackwood? Tilly asked calmly, her fingers moving over her laptop keyboard. Because I'm recording this meeting, which is legal in Pennsylvania as long as one party consents. And I consent. James's face flushed red. You're recording every word, including your threat to harass my mother through frivolous litigation. That's grounds for sanctions, Mr. Blackwood. Perhaps you should consult with your attorney before saying anything else. Patricia Winters closed her folio with a sharp snap. I think we should take a 15-minute recess to reconsider our positions. No recess necessary, I said, because I'm not finished. Rachel, would you like to explain to Edward about Horizon Properties? Rachel's composure finally cracked. I don't know what you're talking about. Horizon Properties, the real estate development company you worked for before you married Edward. The company that specializes in acquiring rural land near interstates and converting it into commercial properties. The company that would pay millions for 200 acres of farmland 10 miles from I-76. Edward turned to his wife. Rachel, it was just a consulting job. Years ago. It has nothing to do with— You married him for the farm, I said quietly. You researched the property, found the irregularities in the title, and saw an opportunity. You married my son to position yourself to make a claim on the land when Joyce died. That's insane, Rachel said. But she wouldn't look at Edward. Is it? Then explain why you contacted James Blackwood 6 months ago. Explain why you've been feeding him information about the property. Explain why you offered him a 50-50 split of any proceeds from the sale. How do you— Rachel stopped, realizing she'd just confirmed it. Edward stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. You knew about all this? About my father not being who I thought he was? About your deal with this guy? He gestured at James Blackwood. And you were going to sell the farm without telling me. Edward, I was protecting us. The property is worth so much more developed. We could have been set for life. By betraying my mother. By selling the land my father loved. The land I grew up on. His voice was rising. Years of manipulation crystallizing into understanding. Everything you've done. Everything you've said about Mom not being competent. About needing to take control of the estate. It was all about the money. Of course it was about money. Rachel's professional mask finally shattered. Wake up, Edward. Your mother is sitting on a gold mine and refusing to acknowledge it. That farm is wasted on her. She can't maintain it, can't develop it, can't do anything with it except watch it deteriorate. I was trying to make something of it, to turn it into something valuable. It is valuable, Edward said quietly. It's my home, my history, my father's legacy. Your father's legacy is a lie. Rachel gestured at the documents on the table. He wasn't even a Sullivan. He was the illegitimate son of an affair. What legacy is that? The words hung in the air like poison. I saw Edward flinch, saw the pain cross his face. Then something hardened in his expression. My father was a good man who loved his family. I don't care whose blood ran through his veins. William Sullivan raised him, loved him, and that made him a Sullivan. Biology doesn't determine family. Love does. He looked at Rachel as if seeing her for the first time, which is something you clearly don't understand. Edward, please. We're done. I want you to pack your things and leave the house. Today. Rachel's face went white. You can't be serious. I'm your wife. You're a con artist who married me under false pretenses. I'll be filing for divorce as soon as I can find a lawyer. He turned to me, and I saw tears in his eyes. Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. I should have seen what she was doing. I stood and walked around the table to him. You saw what you needed to see. When you needed to see it. That's all that matters. He pulled me into a hug, and I felt him shaking. I was going to let them declare you incompetent. I was going to testify against you. But you didn't. You're here now, and you're on the right side. That's what counts. Patricia Winters cleared her throat. While this is very touching, it doesn't resolve the legal issues. Mr. Blackwood still has a claim. No, he doesn't, Tilly said. She pulled up another document on her laptop. I spent last night researching Mr. Blackwood's background. It turns out he's filed similar claims against 3 other properties in the past 5 years. In each case, he found elderly property owners with complicated title histories and tried to intimidate them into settlements. He's what's called a title shark, and his pattern of behavior is well documented. She turned the laptop toward Patricia. I've prepared a complaint to file with the State Bar Association regarding your involvement in this scheme, Ms. Winters. Unless you'd like to withdraw from this case and advise your client to drop his claim immediately. Patricia studied the screen, her expression unreadable. Then she stood and gathered her files. Mr. Blackwood, I'm withdrawing as your counsel effective immediately. I suggest you consult with another attorney about the wisdom of continuing this action. You can't just... I can, and I am. Good luck. She walked out without looking back. James Blackwood stared around the table, his confidence evaporating. This isn't over. Yes, it is, I said firmly. You have until 5 o'clock today to file a withdrawal of your claim with the county clerk. If you don't, Tilly will file her complaint, and I will personally ensure that every newspaper in Pennsylvania knows about your scheme. Martin Blackwood deserves better than to have his memory tarnished by a grandson who dishonors everything he stood for. You're bluffing. Try me. I met his eyes without flinching. I've already lost my husband and spent yesterday being threatened by my own son. I have nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Can you say the same? For a long moment he held my gaze. Then something in him broke. He grabbed his briefcase and stormed out, the door slamming behind him. Rachel was the last to leave. She paused at the door, looking at Edward one more time. I did love you. In the beginning. Maybe you did, Edward said. But you loved money more. After she left, the 3 of us sat in the conference room in silence. Through the window, I could see ordinary people going about their ordinary lives, unaware that a 75-year-old secret had just been exposed, and a family had just been saved. What happens now? Edward asked finally. Now we go home, I said. We go back to the farm, and we figure out how to move forward. Together. What about the secret? About Dad not being William's biological son? Do we tell people? I thought about Joyce, about the choices she'd made to protect her son's reputation, about William, who had loved Richard despite, or perhaps because of, the complicated circumstances of his birth, about Martin, who had watched from a distance and provided what support he could. We tell the truth, I said, not as a scandal, but as a story about people who loved each other and made difficult choices in difficult times. Your father was raised by William and loved by everyone who knew him. That's what matters. The rest is just biology. Tilly closed her laptop. I've already drafted a statement we can give to the Historical Society. It frames the story as a piece of local history. 3 people who made an unconventional arrangement in an era when society was less forgiving. It's honest without being sensational. Perfect, I said. Let's control our own narrative. We left the conference room and walked out into the bright November morning. The air was crisp and clean. smelling of fallen leaves and coming winter. Edward walked between Tilly and me, his hand occasionally brushing mine, as if reassuring himself I was real and solid and still his mother. "I'm going to need therapy after this," he said, a weak attempt at humor. "We all will," Tilly agreed. "But we'll do it together," I added. "As a family, the way it should have been all along." As we reached the parking lot, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Claim withdrawn. You win, Mrs. Sullivan. My grandfather would be ashamed of me." I showed it to Tilly and Edward. "It's over." "Is it, though?" Edward asked. "Are we really safe now?" I looked at my son, at the fear and hope warring in his expression. "Nothing is ever completely safe, sweetheart. But we have the documents, we have the truth, and we have each other. That's more than enough." We drove home in Tilly's car, the three of us, back to the farmhouse that had stood witness to 75 years of secrets and lies and complicated love. The oak trees lining the driveway were shedding their last leaves, creating a carpet of gold and crimson. As we pulled up to the house, I saw it differently than I had 24 hours ago. This wasn't just my home, earned through marriage and inheritance. It was Joyce's refuge, the place where she'd built a life from the ashes of impossible choices. It was William's gift, the home he'd provided for a child who wasn't his blood but was always his son. It was Martin's legacy, the only inheritance he could give to the child he'd loved from a distance. And it was Richard's childhood, preserved in every room and every memory. Now it would be our future, mine, Tilly's, and if he chose to rebuild his life, Edward's too. "Welcome home, Mom," Tilly said softly. "Welcome home," I echoed. And for the first time in days, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. The battle was over. The secrets were exposed. And somehow, impossibly, we had survived. 3 months later, the first snow of December dusted the farmhouse roof like powdered sugar. I stood at the kitchen window, watching Tilly and Edward work together to repair the fence along the western pasture. They'd been spending weekends at the farm since November, helping with maintenance, organizing Joyce's remaining possessions, and slowly rebuilding what Rachel's manipulation had fractured. The divorce proceedings were moving forward. Rachel had signed the papers without contest, perhaps realizing that fighting would only expose more of her scheming to public scrutiny. She'd left town entirely, taking a position with a development company in Ohio. I'd heard through the grapevine that Horizon Properties had quietly let her go, once word spread about her attempted property grab. Apparently, even companies with flexible ethics had limits. James Blackwood had withdrawn his claim, as promised. More than that, he'd sent a formal letter of apology, expressing genuine shame at how he'd dishonored his grandfather's memory. I'd read it once and filed it away. Some wounds didn't need to be constantly examined to heal. The story of Joyce, Martin, and William had been published in the County Historical Society's quarterly journal. Tilly had written it beautifully, framing it not as a scandal, but as a glimpse into how people navigated impossible social constraints in a different era. The response had been surprisingly positive. Several elderly residents had come forward with their own memories of the three people involved, painting pictures of a community that had perhaps suspected more than they'd ever spoken aloud. "Coffee's ready, Mom." Edward's voice pulled me from my thoughts. He stamped snow off his boots at the back door, his cheeks red from the cold. "Tilly's finishing up with the fence posts. She'll be in soon." I poured 3 mugs and set them on the kitchen table, the same scarred oak table where Richard and I had shared 40 years of meals and conversations, where Joyce had made her own difficult choices, one day at a time. Edward wrapped his hands around his mug, steam rising between us. "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "About Dad. About finding out he wasn't who I thought he was." He paused, choosing his words carefully. It bothered me at first. Felt like a betrayal, like my whole childhood was built on a lie. "But?" I prompted gently. But then I remembered something. I was 8 years old, and I'd gotten in a fight at school. Some kid said his dad was stronger than my dad. I came home crying, and Dad sat me down right here at this table. He touched the wood, tracing an old ring stain. He said that being a father wasn't about being the strongest or the richest or having the best job. It was about showing up every day, About choosing to love your kids even when they drove you crazy. About being there. Tears pricked my eyes. That sounds like Richard. He said that any man could father a child, but it took someone special to be a dad. I never understood what he meant until now. Edward looked up, his eyes wet. William chose to be his father. That makes their relationship more meaningful, not less. I think William would be proud to hear you say that. And I think Dad would understand why you fought so hard to keep this place. It was never really about the land, was it? It was about honoring the choices they all made, the sacrifices they endured. Partly that, but mostly it was about not letting manipulative people rewrite history to serve their own greed. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Your father loved this farm. He loved the work, the seasons, the sense of continuity. He'd be happy knowing we fought for it. Tilly came in, bringing a swirl of cold air and snowflakes. She shed her coat and joined us at the table. Fence is solid now, should hold for another few years at least. Thank you, sweetheart, both of you. I looked at my children, feeling gratitude so profound it was almost painful. I know these past months have been difficult. I know I've asked a lot of you. You didn't ask for anything, Tilly said firmly. We chose to stand with you because it was right, because you were right. Still, there were moments when I doubted myself. When Rachel's words about my age, my competence, they got inside my head. I wrapped both hands around my mug, feeling its warmth. Society tells us that getting older means becoming less capable, less relevant, that we should step aside gracefully and let younger people make decisions. Part of me wondered if she was right, if I was being stubborn and foolish trying to hold on to this place. And now? Edward asked. Now I know that age isn't diminishment. It's accumulation. Every year adds another layer of experience, another reserve of strength to draw from. Rachel and James thought they could intimidate an old woman who wouldn't know how to fight back. They underestimated what decades of living teach you about people, about strategy, about patience. You were always 10 steps ahead of them, Tilly said with a smile. The way you documented everything, built your case systematically, that was masterful. That was survival instinct honed over 63 years. I sipped my coffee. When you're young, you think strength means never being afraid, never doubting yourself. When you're my age, you understand that real strength means being terrified and moving forward anyway, feeling doubt but trusting your judgment regardless. Edward was quiet for a moment. I should have trusted your judgment from the beginning. I let Rachel convince me you were failing, losing your edge. I'm so sorry, Mom. You loved your wife. You wanted to believe the best about her. That's not a character flaw, Edward. That's being human. I held his gaze. And when the truth became undeniable, you made the right choice. That's what matters. Still cost you, though. The stress, the fear, having your own son doubt you. It also showed me what I'm capable of. At 63, I investigated a 75-year-old mystery, outwitted a real estate developer and a professional title shark, and exposed a conspiracy to steal my home. That's not nothing. I grinned. In fact, I'm rather proud of myself. Tilly laughed. You should be. You're basically a detective novel protagonist come to life. A very tired protagonist who needs more coffee. But I was smiling. What about you two? What's next for you? Tilly exchanged a glance with Edward. We've been talking about that, actually. About the farm, about the future. Something in her tone made me pay closer attention. Go on. You can't manage 200 acres alone, Mom. That's just reality. But Edward and I have an idea. She pulled out her phone and opened a document. What if we turned part of the property into a family compound? Nothing drastic. Keep the main farmhouse as yours, but build a smaller house for Edward on the eastern section. Maybe eventually I could build one too, if I ever settle down with someone. You want to live here? I was stunned. Both of you. We grew up here, Edward said. It's home. And yeah, Rachel made me question everything, but being back here these past months, working the land, fixing things, it reminded me why Dad loved it so much. I don't want to lose that connection. But your jobs, your lives in the city, I can work remotely most days, Tilly said. Come into Philadelphia when necessary. And Edward's already looking into agricultural opportunities. There's a growing market for organic produce, sustainable farming practices. He could make a real go of it. I looked between them, seeing determination and hope in their faces. "You've really thought this through." "We have," Edward confirmed. "And we want to honor the legacy, not just Dad's legacy or Grandma Joyce's, but the whole complicated truth of it. This land was given in love, maintained through sacrifice, and nearly lost to greed. We want to keep it in the family, keep it meaningful." "What about when I'm gone?" The question had to be asked. "You'll inherit equally, but that could create conflicts over how to use the land." "We've discussed that too," Tilly said. "We're going to set up a family trust with clear guidelines about keeping the property intact. No selling to developers, no dividing it into parcels. It stays farmland, stays a family home. We'll work with a lawyer to make it ironclad." The enormity of it washed over me. After everything, the threats, the legal battles, the fractured relationships, we were not just surviving but planning a future. Together. "Your father would love this," I whispered. "He always dreamed of the family staying connected to the land." "Then let's make it happen." Edward raised his coffee mug. "To new beginnings built on old foundations." We clinked mugs, an informal toast that felt more significant than any legal document. Over the next hour, we discussed practical details, where Edward's house might be sited, how to divide expenses for shared infrastructure, what crops might be viable. It was mundane and ordinary and absolutely perfect. As the conversation wound down, Tilly's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and smiled. "The Historical Society is doing a feature on local family histories. They want to interview you about Joyce's story, Mom. Would you be interested?" I thought about Joyce, about the secrets she'd carried for so long. "Yes, but I want to emphasize something in the interview." "What's that?" "That secrets kept to protect reputation often end up being used as weapons. Joyce hid the truth about Richard's parentage because she feared judgment and social stigma. But that secret nearly cost us everything 75 years later. If she'd been able to live openly, to acknowledge the complicated circumstances without shame, there would have been nothing for Rachel and James to exploit. Society wasn't ready for that honesty in 1949, Tilly observed. "No, but we can be ready for it now. We can tell the truth and trust that people will understand that love and family are complicated, that good people sometimes make unconventional choices, and that biology is just one small piece of what makes a family real." Edward nodded slowly. "I like that. It honors all of them, Joyce, Martin, William, and Dad, without pretending their situation was simple. Nothing about human relationships is simple." I stood and walked to the window again, looking out at the snow-covered fields. But maybe that's the real lesson here. Life is messy and complicated. People make mistakes and compromises, and families are built from 1,000 small choices more than from any single bloodline. Behind me, I heard my children moving around the kitchen, washing mugs, putting on coats to head back outside. The sounds of ordinary family life, the kind of mundane normalcy that Joyce and Martin and William had all sacrificed for in their own ways. "Mom?" Edward paused at the door. "Thank you for fighting, for not giving up, even when it seemed impossible." "Thank you for coming back," I replied, "for seeing through Rachel's manipulation and choosing truth over comfort." After they went back outside, I remained at the window, watching them work side by side. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the snow with golden light. The farmhouse creaked gently around me, settling into its foundations, solid and enduring. My phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Judith. "Heard the children are moving home. Joyce would be so pleased. You've honored her better than she ever honored herself." I smiled and typed back, "We're honoring all of them." The messy, complicated truth of all of them. The Historical Society interview happened 2 weeks later. I told Joyce's story without flinching, without softening the harder edges. The interviewer expected me to be defensive or apologetic. Instead, I spoke about 3 people who'd loved in ways their society couldn't accept and had made the best choices they could within those constraints. "Do you think Joyce regretted her choices?" the interviewer asked. I considered the question carefully. I think she regretted the necessity of them, but her choices gave Richard a stable life, gave William the family he wanted, and allowed Martin to provide for the son he couldn't claim. In the end, Richard grew up loved by everyone involved. That's not a regret. That's a victory. The article ran in the spring edition of the Historical Journal. Several local families reached out afterward, sharing their own stories of complicated inheritances, hidden relationships, unexpected parentage. It seemed everyone had secrets buried somewhere in their family history. But those secrets had less power now, brought into light and examined with compassion rather than judgment. Spring brought new growth to the farm. Edward broke ground on his house in April, a modest structure designed to complement rather than compete with the original farmhouse. Tilly spent weekends helping him, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, our fractured family knitted itself back together. On what would have been Richard's 76th birthday, we held a small ceremony at the farm. We planted an oak tree on the hill overlooking the valley, with a bronze plaque that read, "In memory of Richard Sullivan, son of Joyce and William, beloved husband and father. Family is built from love, not blood." Edward read a statement acknowledging Martin Blackwood's role in his father's life, honoring the sacrifice Martin had made. It felt right to include all of them in the memorial: William, who had raised, Joyce, who had protected, and Martin, who had provided. As I stood on that hill, surrounded by my children, looking out over the land that had caused so much conflict, I felt Richard's presence. Not in any supernatural way, but in the continuation of choices made long ago. We were the living proof that their complicated arrangement had worked, that love and sacrifice and difficult choices could create something lasting. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" Tilly asked, slipping her arm through mine. "About victory," I said. "About how it doesn't always look the way you expect. I thought victory meant keeping the farm, exposing Rachel, protecting my home, and those things happened. But the real victory was discovering I had the strength to fight when everything seemed lost, that I could trust my own judgment even when my own son doubted me. That 63 years of life had taught me things that no amount of youth or money or legal maneuvering could overcome." "You're pretty remarkable," Edward said softly. "I'm pretty stubborn," I corrected with a smile. "But remarkable works too." We walked back to the farmhouse together as the sun set behind us, casting long shadows across the fields. Inside, I'd prepared dinner. Nothing fancy, just pot roast and vegetables, the kind of meal Joyce used to make. The kind of meal that meant home and family and continuity. After dinner, as Tilly and Edward argued good-naturedly about the best place to plant tomatoes, I pulled out the old photo album. The burgundy leather was worn now, the false compartment empty of its explosive secrets. I turned through the pages, looking at faces frozen in time, people who'd made impossible choices and lived with the consequences. I pulled out my phone and took a new photograph, my children laughing together at the kitchen table, the evening light soft through the windows, the farmhouse solid around us. Then I carefully added it to the album, a new page in an old story. No hidden compartments this time. No secrets tucked away for future generations to discover and weaponize. Just an honest photograph of a family that had survived betrayal and doubt and nearly lost everything, but had emerged stronger and more united than before. The farm would continue. The family would continue. And the lessons learned about secrets and strength, about age and wisdom, about choosing truth over comfortable lies, would continue too, passed down like the land itself. I closed the album and returned it to its shelf. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new opportunities to prove that getting older meant getting stronger, not weaker. But tonight, I would sit with my children and enjoy the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I'd fought for what mattered and won. Not through violence or manipulation or legal tricks, but through patience, preparation, and the accumulated wisdom of a life fully lived. Joyce had kept secrets to protect her family. I had exposed those secrets to save mine. Both choices made sense in their own times. Both were acts of love. And in the end, love, complicated, messy, unconventional, but absolutely real, was what survived everything else. Now tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out the video on your screen right now. I'm sure it will surprise you.